How's it going, everybody? Today we're doing the works on the suspension on my 2013 Scion TC. This will apply to any vehicle that has McPherson struts in the front and shocks in the back, which will apply to most cars. And without further ado, let's get into it.
So first order of business, before you start taking the wheel off, you're going to want to make sure you have your car on jack stands. Chocks in the back too are also a good idea, but why, you may ask? Yeah, safety first whenever you're doing this. We're not going to be directly under the car too much on this one, but better safe than sorry. In the latest episode of Engineers vs. Mechanics, like me, you may notice that your strut towers are directly under some plastic, molding, whatever it is that they decide to put there to keep you from being able to get those strut towers easily. So you'll have to go ahead and remove anything obstructing you, anything preventing you from being able to loosen up those bolts that are holding up the strut tower. I'm loosening up both sides here just to make our life easier moving on. Now it's generally good to start doing by one side at a time. So first I'm going to start on the passenger side of the car, do that, and then have all of that as a visual reference all put back together. By the time I need to go do the other side, it'll be like a piece of cake. Sometimes you can't avoid this before it's too late, but in this case I didn't have to remove everything entirely. I was able to loosen it up and then be able to squeeze my fingers in there. So don't remove things you don't have to. Save yourself some time. Always stay clean. No skip sets are also nice when you're buying tools. You never know what you might need. Now, do you need an impact gun to work on cars? No. Does it make a whole hell of a lot easier? Sure does. Wasting no time at all. First thing we're going to take off here is this sway bar end link. So it has an Allen key in the center and then a nut on the outside. Like a dummy, I didn't realize my sway bar end links wouldn't get here until the next day. So I did all of this work again. But once you have this top part taken off, then it's just one more bolt down at the bottom. And then it's super simple to replace your sway bars at the same time whenever you're doing your struts. This is going to really dramatically change how your car feels when you're going around corners. Next up after that, I'm going to take off the bolt that holds on the brake line and the ABS sensor. Now it's really important to remove any of these cables or tubes that attach to the strut, since when it falls out of the top of that strut tower mount under the hood, you don't want to put any unnecessary tension on any of those cables. While I do that, let's talk about the advantages of replacing your suspension. If this sounds familiar, going over railroad tracks, potholes, bumps, the car just feels bouncy in general, that might be a sign that your suspension is worn out and you might be able to benefit from replacing it. I've heard mechanics say you should go every 50 to 60,000 miles before replacing it. My car has now been at 140,000 miles and this is all the original stuff. Can confirm the ride was bouncy as hell all the time. I'm recording this now after having completed everything, and boy, let me tell you, it feels so much better now. You can go over railroad tracks, potholes, it feels like nothing. Going around turns with the new sway bar end links, it feels like the car is brand new again. So it's a little bit of work, it costs a bit of money to do all of this, but I promise you the results are worth it. Back on, what the heck is he doing over there? I'm removing the bolts from the strut tower on the passenger side. Since now I've loosened up everything, I'm ready to start setting it free from the top so then we can remove it out of the bottom. And then we'll be halfway there to putting the new one in. I've sped this up a lot for you guys so you don't have to watch this in real time, me struggling with a tiny wrench that will barely fit to remove a couple of these tight bolts that are keeping the shroud in place. The eagle-eyed viewers among you might have noticed that this is where this diverges a bit from some of the other videos I've seen on the subject. A lot of the time I'll see people will compress the spring, replace the shock inside of the strut, and then leave everything else the same. So the reason you might not want to do that, there's a rubber mount up here at the top that it's attached to what I'm unscrewing. That mount and bearing inside of it wear out over time, just like the rest of your shock, and we'll take a closer look at it once we get it out. But all of those pieces have worn out over the 140,000 miles I've been driving this car. So once you get it out, you'll see that a lot of the rubber parts harden over time or lose their compression. And so if you ever replace just the shocks inside of your strut and wonder why it doesn't feel like a new car again, oftentimes it might be because the mounts themselves have gone bad and just aren't supporting the forces that they used to. So if you're going through all this work anyways, what are you doing? Replace the whole thing. Do it. So once we get those puppies zipped off, then we're going to shift focus back to the bottom so we can take out the strut and start putting our new one in. So as we listen to some sweet sounds of the Milwaukee Impact Wrench, let's talk about money. So for all of these parts, KYB Quick Struts in the front, KYB shocks in the back, MOOG sway bar end links on the front and back as well. All of those parts total up to about $800 to $900 depending on where you source them from. Ultimately, to go to a shop and get all of the same parts and labor, it would probably cost you somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 depending on where you go. Now, ultimately, that leaves us with a savings of $1,000 to $2,000 doing this work ourselves. So it's an awesome repair you can do yourself. It's not too complicated. You don't have to get under the car. And for how much better it makes your driving experience, I think it's totally worth it if you have the tools and the know-how. You might have noticed there a second ago, I was able to get the ABS wire out of the clip before I removed all of the weight-bearing bolts that are connecting that strut assembly inside. Now that I've got that last bolt off, that's the moment of truth. Oh, look at that old crusty thing. So that's the whole strut assembly. There's the mount up there at the top. And then here's the new strut. Remember when we asked why the whole assembly was worth it? So don't be like that guy. Don't unscrew the center bolt. Preferably don't use a spring compressor if you don't have to. Quick Struts make the whole assembly process just so much easier, a lot safer. All I have to do here now is just stick that new one up where the old one was, bolt it in, and then we're good to go. I don't have to deal with any compressors, potential explosions. It's just a much better experience through and through. And for just a few bucks more compared to the plain strut alone, it's a no-brainer to get the Quick Struts from KYB. So once you got the new one in there, it's usually easiest, or I found it easiest, if you screw in one of the bolts connecting the top of the strut to the strut tower, and then you'll quickly want to do all three so your strut isn't just hanging from one bolt, putting any stress on any of those threads. Not ideal in case you ever have to come back here later. Now that it's in the top, you've made your life nice and easy. Now you just have to rotate it so that the knuckle goes back into the two slots where those two main bolts go in that hold it on. And it might need a little bit of convincing, but you should get a nice thunk once it fits into place. Then you just gotta thread that bolt into the holes, and then your assembly will be holding itself up and you don't need the tire below. So this part can be a little bit tricky. So whenever you get new parts, sometimes they don't thread in perfectly to the old ones without a little bit of convincing. So you might need to move it around just a little bit. Eventually you'll feel the bolt will find the perfect opening to be able to slide through. And then once you get it through to the other side, sometimes if it's stuck, you just need to move it around a tiny bit more. You can take a wrench to help kind of rotate it forwards, but you don't want to bang it with a hammer if at all possible. You want to protect those threads, since if it cross tightens, it can become impossible to remove. So when we're putting this back together, we're basically doing it in the reverse order that we took it apart. So instead of the first thing that we do being removing the lines, the first thing we do is put those knuckle bolts back in place. So then we don't have to worry about the lines supporting all of the weight. And then if your assembly is like mine, there's a couple of metal plates that attach the brake line and the ABS wire that have to thread through in a very particular orientation, so you might have to mess around with it a little bit. But it looks like I found the ticket, and then mine was just a threaded bolt inside of the strut you screw in. And then again, like a dummy, my sway bars didn't arrive until the next day, so I'm reattaching the old ones for now, soon to be replaced with the MOOGs. Now this will make a night and day driving experience doing all of this. Your sway bars and your suspension control a lot of how your car feels going over bumps and going on turns, so if you have a little bit of technical know-how and you're willing to get your hands dirty, it's totally worth taking a day and a weekend to do all of this, and you get to save a bit of money on top. What we haven't talked much about is safety. So when your suspension goes bad, especially in the front, when you have a front engine car like this one, your shocks and struts going bad in the front will oftentimes increase your stopping distance since the car lurches forward. But when you get new struts and suspension up in the front, your stopping distance will actually decrease pretty significantly. So not only will your car feel much better to drive, but it'll also be safer too. Now you may be asking, this is awesome. Thanks for the information, but this doesn't help me with my specific car. Well, don't be afraid to do some research. Using AI can be a super helpful starting tool. I would say always bounce off whatever ideas you get from AI or product selection off of a human being. Make sure you can talk to somebody who's actually had real experience using whatever part or technique you're thinking about using. But there's a lot of tools and information at your disposal. So even though I may not be working on the exact car you have, you can take a lot of these advice and steps in the process and apply that to your car. Now let's talk about tools. So generally speaking, you're not going to need a crazy set of fancy specialty tools to do this type of suspension work. You definitely will need a set of sockets. If you're working on a Toyota, they're probably going to be metric. And then you're going to need a set of wrenches. I also highly recommend having ratcheting wrenches. They made my life a lot easier, several sections of this. But you'll definitely also need Allen keys, since oftentimes they'll have bolts like that sway bar end link. And then last but not least, you'll absolutely need torque wrenches. Torque wrenches are extremely important. Hand tight only takes you so far, but the internet or ChatGPT will be able to give you a lot of the torque specs for various parts, which you can then verify. And then making sure things are torqued down to where they're supposed to be. Make sure you don't damage any components, as well as make it tight enough for the types of forces that it's going to be taking on. And it's what the manufacturer wanted, so you should try to replicate it if you can. I get it, torque wrenches aren't cheap, especially a nice one. I'm using an Icon torque wrench that I got from Harbor Freight, which is fantastic. But it's absolutely something worth investing in. If you're ever doing any work on your car, making sure things are torqued down to where they're supposed to be is going to save you a lot of headache in the long run. Because that one time you over tighten a bolt and it snaps, or you break something, since you didn't torque it down to spec or it falls off, you'll save every dollar that you spent on your torque wrench avoiding some of those mistakes. Outside of that, general safety equipment that's a non-negotiable, like the jack stands. I have the car up on a jack still in the front, so I have 3 points of contact. Not absolutely necessary, but having it on 2 jacks at least is an absolute should. And then having chocks in the back for the wheels so the car doesn't roll. Definitely recommend doing that as well. But nothing else too crazy besides that. Highly recommend having impact tools as well. It saves a lot of time, but you can get everything done with hand tools for the most part. For any really tough bolts, having a breaker bar will save you in most cases where you would have needed an impact wrench anyways. Then once you get everything torqued to spec, you're good to go to start putting everything back together and start heading over to the other side, and then we do a rinse and repeat. Now, what are some other advantages of refreshing your suspension in your aging car? Well, if you've noticed when you go over bumps and you hear a loud clunk or feel a very sudden stop whenever you go over a bump and feel the car completely lurch down, that's your car slamming on all of your other steering components. So everything in that axle that we were just taking off that's attached to that shock is taking a lot of the brunt of that load. And when you're going around turns and your sway bars are causing a lot of body roll, more strain is being put on all of those parts as well. So having refreshed suspension is going to take off some of that load and bear that weight the way it's supposed to, and it'll protect some of your other components long term as well. So you're going to get a fabulously better driving experience, and then you're also going to save yourself likely a pretty significant amount of money in the long run as well. So it's not cheap doing all of this, but a dollar saved is a dollar earned. Another quick tip here, when you're putting your wheels back on and tightening the lug nuts, when it's still in the air, you don't want to torque it all the way down. You want to wait until it's back on the ground. So I lowered the setting on my impact wrench, and then I also loosened them before I got them up here. So then it's super easy to remove and put them back on, and you can tighten it up, but don't torque it down until the car is actually on the ground, since a lot of that friction from the car being on the ground will help you be able to get all of the torque figures that you should based on the spec of your lug nuts, which is probably between somewhere to 80 foot-pounds. Now, if you're like me, you might find after you do one side, doing the other side usually is about twice as fast. You kind of know where everything is, you know everything you need to do. And then as I'm going through here, I'm just reassembling some of those fender flares, whatever it's called, that's keeping those strut towers covered. So now that I'm finished with the driver's side or passenger side, now I can swap over. And here again, just pointing out some of the stuff here that I have to remove. First, we take care of that ABS sensor and brake line. Order of these things doesn't matter too much, but you're going to want to remove those lines before you have too much load bearing on it. And then here on this side, on both ends, the most corroded piece for me was those sway bar end link bolts. So I just sprayed it with a bit of PB Blaster. That stuff will save your life. Penetrating oil of any kind, my favorite's PB Blaster, but any of those are going to make your life significantly easier whenever you're dealing with rusted or seized bolts. Once I let it soak in a bit, the Allen key fit right in. There was enough rust in there to prevent me from being able to put it in previously. So after the PB Blaster had settled, it dissolved enough of that rust. Allen key fit right in. Now the sway bar end link's out. Again, to replace the whole sway bar, you would just remove that bolt supporting at the bottom. Super easy while you're there. Then I just sprayed down the two knuckle bolts that are holding in the strut into the assembly. And again, here we go to the tower. Now that we've loosened up all of those cables and lines, now we can remove the mounts from the strut tower up at the top. Now, being completely honest, this is probably the part of the repair that created the most anxiety for me and frustration. So as you're going through here, you might notice that I can barely fit my fingers down there where the bolts are actually stored for the front and the back one. For only the very closest one to us did I have easy access to it. So mostly I was worried as I was going through there. Breaking the bolts, not that much of a problem, just a pain in the butt to fit the wrench down there, but having the flared end definitely helped. But what made me nervous was losing those bolts back there into the firewall. So once you get the nut off, I kind of put my finger in as I loosened it up. After I had the ratcheting wrench and got it close to the top, then I would reach my fingers in and then loosen it the rest of the way. And once I get it out, I was able to pinch it between my two fingers to make sure that it didn't fall back. Since not the end of the world, the new struts came with new bolts that would have fit there anyways, but the old hardware looked a bit superior to me to the ones that it came with new, so I decided to reuse them. And that would have been a big pain in the butt had they fall back there, and it's a possibility they may never been seen again. And frustrating because I didn't have a huge range of motion removing these parts here, so I had to do a lot of short strokes back and forth to get those bolts loose enough to get with my fingers. And then it was basically pinching back and forth with my fingers to do single rotations, which, again, huge pain in the butt. Now that we've got that out of the way, now it's the easy part. Throw the impact gun on there. Make short work of those bolts. Got all of the electronics and lines detached. We're making record time on this one. So you'll notice as you go faster, just make sure not to get careless. Make sure you're keeping good track of where your bolts are going as you're doing this process, especially when you're getting into more complicated jobs. It can be a nightmare if you just have a big pile of bolts and no memory of where they go to. This can happen especially if you have a project that runs overnight into the next day. Waking up and walking back out, seeing a bunch of parts can be one of the most horrifying experiences a mechanic can experience. So the way I found, again, to get these struts in, easiest to get it in top first. So making sure it's behind where it needs to be down in the bottom area, but then threading the bolts where it mounts up to the strut tower, making sure those fit and threaded into those holes where they're supposed to, and then just slapping a bolt on there to grab it in. That was what was easiest for me, because then you don't have to support the strut with your weight after you get those 3 bolts that get attached again. You can always tighten it back up. But if you do it in the reverse order and you attach it to the bottom first, it can be a real nightmare to rotate it and fit it into place and then push it up into the strut tower assembly. It fit perfectly into place in my case, starting with everything at the top. Something else to think about, whenever you do your suspension, you're going to take your car to get an alignment afterwards. An alignment will make sure you didn't adjust any of the camber or toe as you were doing this. Now, anecdotally, I didn't need much adjustment after doing it this way. Attaching it to the strut tower up at the top first seemed to do a really good job of keeping everything relatively aligned. They changed a tiny bit when I took it in, and it was good for peace of mind, but you might have a little bit better experience maintaining everything the way it originally was, putting the tower in the top as well first. Something else you might have noticed I did earlier, I put a block of wood on the tire as I had it resting under the old wheel assembly. So the block of wood just gave it a little bit of extra space to fall down onto. It wasn't putting strain on the lines when I just had it resting on the tire, but it kept it resting exactly where I needed to put the bolts in with that little extra block of wood. So get creative if you have things in your garage that won't get damaged too much, and in this case even provide a little bit of a buffer between the wheel assembly and the wheel. That made my life so much easier when putting these bolts back in, to have that little bit of extra platform, to have everything exactly where it was, and I wasn't using my knee in this example to push it up into place. So still doing everything in the reverse order. Now that we've got those knuckle bolts back in place, now it's time to put the brake line and ABS sensor back in, and the sway bar end link. Again, highly recommend replacing it. I replaced mine the next day. I just put everything back together in lieu of not having the parts arrive that day. But do your best to plan all of this out together. Since you're already there, you're already removing the sway bar end link from the strut anyways. It's one more bolt to do it, and it will definitely change how your car drives. I hope this video was helpful for everybody watching at home. Hopefully it inspires you the next time you go for a ride. Consider, when you go over bumps, do you hear a loud clunk? Is it bouncy? It might be time for new suspension. Even if you're not in a position to do it yourself, highly recommend taking it to a trusted shop. Since all of those things we said before are true, it'll make your car safer, feel better. It'll ultimately save you money in the long run, since you're going to be protecting other, potentially even more expensive components from breaking. So definitely take that into consideration. If your car is over 60 or 70,000 miles and it hasn't had any suspension work done, it might be time, and it might save your life. Just kidding. It might, but hopefully. But thank you guys for tuning along for my first video. Let me know what other car repairs you'd like to see. I might have it slated up on the to-do list anyways. I did my whole AC system the week after this one, so I'll have a AC compressor, condenser, evaporator video coming out for you soon. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.